Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So if you followed along last week, you would have seen that we did some of these different backgrounds using watercolors and stencils. And for some of them, we use other water soluble type mediums to get these effects. So what do you do with these backgrounds and these stenciled textures once you're done with them? Today, I'm going to show you a really quick project on how you can turn these beautiful backgrounds into something that you can use in your art journal and in your creative projects. So when you're choosing some of these pages, the question comes down to, are you looking for something with more white space? Do you want something with more subtle texture that you can maybe do some more outlining and doodling on? Are you looking for something a little bit more solid like this that you can basically just add in color and other textures over top? There's so many different ways you can go with this. For the one today, I ended up choosing one that had a fair amount of contrast and detail with the idea that that was the main focus of that journal page, and I was going to be adding a quote and some doodling and some other things on top. So with this one, what I've noticed is that I have the borders on the sides. So because the stencil was shorter than the journal page, to try to help even this out and make it look more purposeful, I'm going to add a 1/2 inch border around the entire image, and that's going to help balance things out a little bit. And when you're doing a 1/2 inch border, it's nice to have something like this Tim Holtz Ideology ruler. What I love about this ruler is because it has both the horizontal and vertical markings. That makes my life a lot easier when I'm trying to measure things and trying to have a really even edge around my project. And I'm just going with faint pencil lines for this. I'm not going too crazy. And so you can see that when I'm lining this up, I have the 1/2 inch along the bottom. And then I can come across. So that way I always end up getting a straight line. I don't have to work nearly as hard. And because it's ruler, because of the way it's created, it makes it just very easy to get those lines. And so for this section here, it's a little harder because you can't butt up against there. I'm measuring a 1/2 inch down from the edge here and a 1/2 inch down from the edge here. And that way you can basically just add your little border in. And to make this very simple, what I'm going to do is just add some golden iridescent gold deep fine to the edges here. Just adding a little bit of paint to the edges is going to kind of bring all of this together. And if you're a little bit worried about not getting a perfect edge to this, this is where we can go in later with a black pen and just refine that edge a bit. And if you haven't done a lot of painting before, one thing to realize is that going up and down over horizontal is a lot easier when you're trying to get a straight line. And with this one, I am just going to go straight down. It's a little bit more than a 1/2 inch with my paintbrush, but I am just going to run with it because it's easier just to run the whole paintbrush down the side over trying to add 2 or 3 lines to get the intensity that I want. And because it's quite warm today and because I am using a fluid paint and not going on too thick with it, I'm just going to add a second layer onto that. This iridescent deep fine is a semi-transparent paint, so I'm going to have to go over my surface just a couple times just to get the coverage that I want. And just make sure that things are dry before you add your layer of paint. I've definitely creeped up past that 1/2 inch there, but that's okay. I am not done with this page yet. I'm fine with it being a little bit thicker in places. And you can see a little bit of the faint outline of the watercolor, but don't worry too much about that. So this is dry, but I want to give it a little bit more drying time before I look to add some doodles to it. Because that's my next plan, is to just add doodles to the outside of this just to give it like a nice final touch. So I found a quote that I wanted to add to my page. And that quote is, "You'll never do a whole lot unless you're brave enough to try." And that's from Dolly Parton. And I really have started really admiring her just for some of the things she's done and just how she's just really lived life to the fullest. I chose that quote because I have been thinking about the idea of being brave and being willing to try new things. And as summer is coming to a close, I've been thinking a lot about the fall and what I want the rest of my year to look like. And maybe this is something that you also do around this time of year. And I've been thinking about the importance of trying new things and putting things out there and see what will come of it. And when I saw this quote from Dolly Parton, I thought it was just perfect. The idea that you'll never do a whole lot unless you're brave enough to try. And that to me, it's almost more important than the idea of being fearful is the idea that I could be missing out on some amazing opportunities. And it's not always easy to try. It can be overwhelming and challenging. No one likes rejection. I know I don't like rejection, and that for me has been something I've really had to challenge myself about. But I think it's important that we try new things in our creativity and in our life. When we give ourselves permission to try, this gives us permission to try something we've never done before. I've really worked on not judging the outcome, but instead is seeing the effort that I put in the accomplishment. Like I approached that person about teaching a class. I talked with this person that I never thought I would talk to. I made a new friendship because I put myself out there. So instead of judging ourselves as being either perfect or a failure, I think we need to change our perspective and see everything as a learning experience. I've been finding that the more I'm putting myself in uncomfortable situations, it's been really helping me to grow and see what will happen. And what I found amazing about a lot of these situations is that I go in going, oh, they're going to say no. And instead they say, yes, we'd love to have you involved with this, or we would love to see you teach for us. And that for me has just been huge. It's been moving past my limiting beliefs and just embracing what could be. And as I'm adding in my words and my journaling, I'm going to add in a few things that I want to try this year before the end of the year. And that will require a certain amount of bravery. And maybe there's some things that you want to try. Maybe it's posting a picture of your most recent art project for the first time. Maybe it's just putting yourself out there regarding friendships or relationships. Maybe it's showing some vulnerability. There's definitely so many ways that we can show vulnerability in our lives and be brave enough to try something new. And I've realized more and more that it's worse not to try at all than to possibly fail. And for me, it's been changing that perspective towards what success looks like. Trying is success for me. And I think that is something that I really wanted to get out of this page. So I really like mixing up sizing on my letters. And so that's why I cut out a few things with my brother's Scan and Cut. And this is just basically one of the fonts that was in the program. I just welded everything together. And then now I have a die cut that I can use for my letters. And just a little bit of glue is the easy way just to add these letters onto your project. So I like the gold on this page, but I want to try to add in a little bit more contrast. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to run my pen around the edge of my border. And this is a Posca paint pen. I have a video about paint pens. These are my favorites. I've also discovered the Artistro paint pens. They're good as well, but I do find that they are a lot less pigmented. And so I think what you're really paying for with your Poscas is you're getting the super dark color, where I would need to maybe put 1 or 2 layers of color to get something similar with a Artistro as compared to a Posca, but that's just something to be aware of. So if you're on a budget, try the Artistro pens. If you're not on a budget, try the Posca ones because they are really fantastic. And that line is a little bit wonkier, so I'm just going to put in a slightly thicker border there. And then if you have a situation like that where your ruler ended up grabbing the edge of the paint, just run a baby wipe along the edge just to clean that up. I'm also going to be adding some doodling in here, so it's going to be okay that there's maybe a little bit of smudging because they're not going to be able to tell once I finish adding all my doodling. Sometimes no matter how careful you are, you still get smudging, and that's all right. I'm actually going to just do a little bit of a drop shadow, and that's just a way of just bringing a little bit more cohesion into the design. Because I've added in die cuts, it can feel a little bit wonky on the page sometimes, so by adding in a little bit of a drop shadow, this helps ground these images so they feel more like they're part of your layout. And you want to think about which direction the light is hitting your page. In this case, I assume my light was coming from the more northwest position. So basically from the left facing downwards. And based off of that, I ended up adding my shadows to the bottom and to the right-hand side of each letter. That way you can see by adding a shadow, it gives letters dimension and adds contrast to your journal page. And so you can see this by adding in those edges. That makes a big difference on just how those letters pop from the page. I really like adding a little bit of black. You want that contrast so that you end up having not just mid-tones, but you'll end up having white and black and all the colors in between. And so I'm going to finish off this page by just adding some doodles. I ended up choosing to use a black Posca marker with a 0.7mm nib tip to add the doodling to my page. And there's so many different patterns available, ones you can make up yourselves. There's lots on the internet, but I chose a fairly simple pattern. So to add the lines to my page, I end up starting by adding diagonal lines. But I didn't want them to be flat diagonal lines. I wanted them to be curved. When you add the curved lines, it means that you don't necessarily have to have perfect spacing. It's a little bit of a looser feel, and it gives, I find, a little bit more dimension, a little bit more interest, a little bit more playfulness to your doodling. And so by adding them in a diagonal manner, one way with a slight curve, and then adding them the other one a slight curve, I didn't have to worry about this perfect spacing. I didn't have to worry about using a ruler. It was very freehand. And then to add a little bit more interest to this, you could just leave it as a diamond pattern. But in my case, I wanted to add both horizontal lines and vertical lines. And you'll notice that for every area that I had a horizontal line, the next one was going to be a vertical line. And so you need to keep track of where your horizontal and vertical lines are, just so that you end up with a pattern and then it doesn't look inconsistent because you've added too many verticals or too many horizontals. So making sure that you flip between the two designs as you add them to your page. And I made a point not to be too precise about my horizontal and vertical lines. I wanted something that was a little bit more loose, so I didn't spend a lot of time making sure everything was perfect. If that would bother you, go ahead, take your time. Treat it like meditation, where you have a little bit of time just to be in your thoughts and think about things and to add in those doodles and for it to be a really meditative thing. And if you're having trouble with the horizontal lines, for most of us, we are more used to being able to do vertical lines because coming up and down is easier than trying to get straight ones horizontal. So that's where I flip my book. I flip my book so I'm always going up and down. And even when I'm doing horizons on paintings, I'm now learning to flip my painting over a bit and then making sure to get that straight horizontal line. It's very hard to get a really straight horizontal line just across the page because our tendency is to try to curve our hand. So I hope this is giving you some idea on how to use those beautiful backgrounds we created last week. And this is just one idea. There's so many ways you could doodle and add additional layers, additional stenciling, and other mediums to create a beautiful page. And with this one, it was just adding die cuts, adding a little bit of paint pen, and you end up with a beautiful project. And if you're looking for more ideas on how to get rid of the blank page in your journal, click here. In this video, I show you 5 different ways of breaking up your background with acrylic paint. So I hope you enjoyed that video, and I'll see you there.